Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a virtual conversation, Freedom Day, celebrating Juneteenth and Pride together. If our panelists could please turn your cameras on at this time. For our audience, if at any time during the conversation you have questions, please use the Q&A function and please indicate if you're a student, faculty, staff, or an alumni. If we're unable to get to your question today, we will be following up with you after the event. We are recording today's event and it will be made available on the SUNY Pride website. I am now pleased to turn the floor over to Teresa Miller, Senior Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Chief Diversity Officer for SUNY System Administration, who will be moderating the conversation today. Terry?
Thank you very much, Johanna, and and welcome everyone to a terrific panel. And I think it's what's going to be a very engaging conversation. As Johanna pointed out, I'm the Senior Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and the System Chief Diversity Officer. In that role, I'm responsible for setting the priorities and strategies for diversity, equity, inclusion across SUNY's 64 campuses. It's a leadership role that I'm very privileged and pleased and honored to fulfill. First, let me say, we want to keep this very engaged and informal conversation among our panelists and then later with you in terms of questions and answers. So as moderator, I get to set that, that climate a bit for this conversation. First, I want to say what an incredible past month or so, right? So, just recently, New York State passed a new law recognizing Juneteenth as a state holiday. And then yesterday, Congress passes a new law making Juneteenth a national holiday. And as well, yesterday, the Department of Education announced that Title IX protects students from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Right, so our transgender students are protected in living and learning and thriving in higher ed. I mean, this is, and I think it is also an endorsement, right, that our transgender students should feel welcome, respected, and a sense of belonging on every SUNY campus. So this is tremendous news, and it's a lot of good news at one time, right? And so I have my mud cloth. I have my SUNY pride. I'm ready to celebrate. But what does all this mean, right? We certainly know that amidst all of this, right, there have been repeated and renewed attacks on transgender students, athletes, and community members, and the LGBTQ community overall. We know that there have been attacks on implicit bias training, attacks on telling a different narrative of American history that incorporates many different viewpoints, right? And so our panel of distinguished guests is going to really help us to sort some of this out, help us to understand from their expertise and their experience, what is the significance? And so without further ado, I want to, I'll list our panelists first. That's the order in which they're going to speak. And I'll start off with Assemblymember Alicia Heineman. She's going to begin the conversation with a bit of some framework for kind of how Juneteenth became an official holiday in New York State and really talk about the leadership role she took in making that a reality. Then next, our recent Old Westbury graduate, Khalif Mattel, who is shy, right? Who's told me he's an introvert, but he's an incredible leader and now most recently are one of the inaugural SUNY fellows, right? Student advocate fellows. So, very excited to have him on the panel to talk a little about from his perspective, his generation, what this means, this intersection of Juneteenth and Pride. Next, Professor Chris Kuchenberger, who's the chair of Onondaga Community College's Art and Photography Department, is going to help us broaden that discussion a little bit and understand this not simply in terms of civil rights, but broader LGBTQ and trans rights. And lastly, Dr. Patricia Clark, who's the associate professor in the Department of English and Creative Writing at SUNY Oswego, is going to share some of her expertise with us and express and explain some of the significance, right, of all this great news happening at a time in which, you know, there's been attacks on critical race theory and attacks on civil rights and implicit bias, et cetera. So we have a great lineup and we have a great group of panelists. I'm going to start with Assemblymember Hindman. And I was wondering if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to lead the effort to have Juneteenth adopted as a New York State holiday. Maybe talk a little bit about, you know, was there broad consensus or did you have to twist some arms? And, you know, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the most meaningful ways to celebrate Juneteenth?
First of all, thank you so very much for having me. And it's an honor to be here today, especially when the momentum of Juneteenth is now a federal holiday signed into law by President Joe Biden. So I don't know if you can tell the humbleness and the gratitude I have from where it started to where it is now, that in the wake of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter movement and the marches that were taking place throughout the city, the state, the country. And we had gone back to Albany shortly before, and we had passed quite a few pieces of legislation around police reform. Now, these bills had been on the governor's desk for a while. It's not like we just put these bills into place, but the death and the marching definitely spearheaded that. And my staff and I were talking, and we suggested this bill should be put in. And I put the bill in, not knowing, you know, what the future would hold, but it just seemed like the right time. Juneteenth, a day of liberation, a real Independence Day for Black people in this country. It needed the highlight. It needed this holiday. So I put the bill in, and a couple months later, I get someone calls me, like, "Isn't this your bill? Why is the governor talking about he's introducing this? What's going on?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" So, and I'm not on Twitter like that. My staff is. So I pick up my phone. I'm looking. I'm like, "That's my bill. How is he not gonna give this Black woman credit?" And if you know our history, you know, people have always been taking credit for our work. So I said, absolutely not. And I called his staff. No one called me back. And then I went on Twitter and was kind of fiery. And all of a sudden I got all these calls. And I will say that we're on great terms, but I just think at the time it was about owning something for us. And the bill, the Senate sponsor is Senator Kevin Parker from Brooklyn, of course, and you have to have a Senate sponsor. So I introduced the bill, the Senate picked it up, and it passed, and the governor signed it, and it became a state holiday as of 2020 for all state employees in the public sector, and all municipalities and all counties in the state of New York, all 62, now observe it as a state holiday.
Assemblymember Hindman, let me just ask you. So what's fascinating now about this moment is now all of New York State and all of the United States, right, will be celebrating a holiday that many people, right, it's not a part of their fabric, their culture. You know, what is it going to look like when white people are celebrating? We know Black people celebrate Juneteenth for a long time, right, in many different places. What will it look like for white America, do you think, to celebrate Juneteenth?
We have been, and if you know, Frederick Douglass, if you, I don't remember the quote exactly, but we have been celebrating July 4th for years. We were enslaved. It is not our Independence Day, but yet and still, you know, a lot of Black people, we barbecue, we have friends over. These are things that we do. It's a time for family. This is the same thing. This is history. This is our history. This is American history. So just like how we have flags, we can wear red, black, white people can wear red, black, and green, and they can celebrate and understand that our history is also their history, because it's not taught in schools. And I went to SUNY Newport, so I hope everyone knows that. And I didn't know about Juneteenth until I went to SUNY Newport. I was a took so many Black Studies courses. Any elective I could take, I took a Black Studies course, Black music, Black dance, Blacks in law. Any requirement that I had an option, I took a Black Studies course. And the chair of the department at the time, Dr. Lewis, said, you might as well add these classes and become a Black Studies major. So that's how I found out about Juneteenth, was through Black Studies. And so my hope is that as the holiday grows, and it will be commercialized, and I'm okay with that because this is America and this is a capitalist society. But I just think people are going to ask, what is this? And learn the history that not all slaves were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, as you have been taught in school. That did not free all the slaves. It only freed slaves that were in the states that were at war with the Union.
Well, on our comment line, Walvi de Jesus adds, it's Afro-Latinx people as well, right? How to, that they will be joining. So do you imagine that everybody of whatever ethnicity will add their spin to it, sort of in the way that people have added their spin to the 4th of July, which wasn't a holiday that spoke to everyone, right?
Right, absolutely. It's part of, I think it's part of our culture that this country, the way it was founded, where we are now, all of the nations that are here. I happen to live in Queens, New York, which is the most diverse borough on the face of the earth. We have so many groups, so many languages, so many ethnicities that we celebrate other holidays. I have a large Bangladeshi population. We celebrate the Bangladeshi Independence Day. Juneteenth will fall in line with all the other holidays, but it can't be just a performative. It has to be the education that comes with it for me. And so this year in Queens, we're doing a huge festival in Roy Wilkins Park, but also next year we're looking at doing a teach-in for not just the children, for the adults also, to understand the historical significance of what Juneteenth is. It's not just a day off. This is a day about our history and our place in America.
So let's not make it a shopping day, is what you're saying, right? Right, like all these other made for Hallmark, because Hallmark's going to get in on this.
Yeah,
like Juneteenth cards everywhere. Buy a Juneteenth card, right? But could you talk a little bit more about the ways that you think are really significant ways to celebrate Juneteenth?
I think so. I'll tell you what we're doing in Queens. Leading up to Juneteenth, every night this week, we have had a panel about leading up to Juneteenth. So last night was the Great Migration of post World War II and World War I. How many Blacks moved from the South to the North for jobs? And we're fleeing states, Kentucky, Western states, fleeing lynching and being able to have businesses and being able to live. They flee to the North so they could get jobs. So we had a workshop about the Great Migration, and we had a workshop about mental health, because if you think about Black people living in this country, your mental health, what you have to deal with is different than what your white counterparts have to deal with. If you're a Black man, it is inevitable that you get stopped by a police officer. That's just part of your life. And some of my white colleagues, I'm like, you understand why we fight so much for voting reform, because it's different for us than you and what we have to do. So every night this week, we're having workshops leading up to our Juneteenth celebration on Juneteenth, Saturday. And throughout the state, Buffalo has one of the biggest celebrations for Juneteenth. One of the things, because I came out of education, is that I've really partnered with our school district down here in Southeast Queens to make sure that the students, yes, we have a festival, but the education aspect of it is just as important. We also have a reenactment of Juneteenth taking place at our festival on Saturday. We have an artwork, we have a senior component, we have for our children, we have health, because when we talk about Blacks in this country, we have to look at our health, the education, our homes, mental health. And I think you can find a workshop that will address every part of the Black diaspora in this country, and you can relate that to Juneteenth.
Oh, well said. Well said. I'm curious of, so what's fun about this panel and this event, right, is really being able to imagine what it means to be able to center queer folk of color, right, in this place, Black queer folk in this space, right, around Juneteenth. And you know, and I was curious, you know, what your thoughts are just about having this sort of doing Pride and Juneteenth at the same time, and what maybe that does for communities who've maybe been overlooked, and you know, kind of have intersectional identities, but have maybe been overlooked in either Pride, you know, principally, or in sort of Black civil rights movements.
I think the intersectionality of the Pride agenda and our Black agenda is that, you know, we have come to this month by basically blood, sweat, and tears, and civil rights violations, and protesting and marching and loving who you love, and being able to be free to express who you are in this city and this state at this time. And it's not lost on me that in every, you know, without struggle, there is no progress. And so we're all at this juncture where we can be ourselves. Now, if you think about where gay people were before, I mean, in the 1800s, early 1900s, to get to this point where we have parades, where families have resources, where you can get married. It didn't come, you know, we stand on shoulders of so many who suffered and sacrificed so we could get here. And I think that struggle, the intersectionality of that struggle is what aligns the two at this point in time. I can't tell you how happy I am that, you know, we're starting to open the world back up again. And I think this month with Pride and Juneteenth is a perfect way for us to get back to, or make a new normal, right? And the inclusivity of it all. We are living in such a time as this, whereas I'm sure, Teresa, when you were younger, when I was younger, did we ever think we'd be here? No. But look at the shoulders we have to stand on, and it comes out of those people who sacrifice for us to get to this point in time.
The chat line, sorry, on the chat line, I just want you to know, Assemblywoman Hindman, you were getting a lot of love from the SUNY New Paltz alumni. And particularly the Black Studies Department. Is Kaina Rivera, a class of 18,
I tell you,
when everything.
I think about Dr. Wade Lewis, A.J. Williams Myers, Zelbert Moore, Dr. Professor Branch. Those classes and those professors, you know, had so much influence on my life, and not me, just, you know, my sorority sisters, my people that I still keep in touch with. And I would never have gone to SUNY New Paltz if it wasn't for my parents. But it's probably the best 4 years of my life, and I'm thankful for that, SUNY New Paltz.
Well, New York State's thankful for you.
Thank you.
And what a wonderful thing that SUNY New Paltz could have had, you know, an impact on your growth and development. I want to ask other panelists, if you have anything you'd like to say to the Assemblywoman, or questions before we continue with our other panelists.
I would just like to say I really appreciate the shout out, being a professor at another SUNY institution teaching Black Studies. It warms my heart that you are able to pay it forward, and it just is a testament to the SUNY system and what it does for students of color. Just a couple of things that you said, a couple of things that I thought were noteworthy. You talked about the celebrations, and there was a comment about Afro Latinx. And Annette Gordon-Reed, who wrote this fabulous book on Juneteenth, talked about how Juneteenth was celebrated in Texas. And one of the things that she and her family did was make tamales. And this is a Black family making tamales to celebrate Juneteenth, and I thought that was just so cool, and appreciate the sort of cross cultural intersections of celebrations. And there was something else that you said, but I will limit it to that. I'll come back to it probably when I have my 10 minutes, but I really appreciated what you had to say.
Yeah, in Texas, I think, yeah, you have to think about the influence of Mexico in Texas at that time. And so I think there's always this what's what I'm looking at, this stereotype that if you're Black, you're only one thing. And we're not monolithic. We are Mexican, we are Indian, we are, I mean, look at our first Black president. I think we are not one thing and or one person. And that is what we constantly are fighting against in this country, is that this holiday is not just a holiday. To me, it's a turning point in the education of this country. That's what I see this as, for this to be signed into law. We are not one thing. We are not one person. So tamales on Juneteenth, yes, I say yes to that.
And with that, I'd like to queue up our next panelist, Khalif Shakmatelis. And I'll just tell you, this young man has just impressed me so much in terms of his leadership at SUNY Old Westbury. He is a self-described introvert, but let me tell you, this you run, Khalif, on like 120 miles an hour all the time. And I would just open it up to you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the significance of Juneteenth and Pride, from your generation. You're the younger generation. Mm-hmm. So, and I know a lot of the folks, the 132 participants on this call are of that generation. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miller. I would like to start off by thanking Assemblywoman, I'm gonna call you woman because you're a woman, Assemblywoman Hyman, for introducing the bill back in a couple years ago. So Juneteenth, I would say, like where we're at now is, I would say it's a historic moment. It goes to show that through trials and tribulations, never to give up and to keep fighting, no matter when the odds are against you. So I feel like this is something that is going to open the eyes to a lot of people. So of course, the education piece, my generation now, not saying that they didn't know the significance of Juneteenth before, in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it woke it up a lot more, and it pushed. I would say that it's, for me, I feel like it's hurtful that we have to fight so hard to get to where we want to be, and where I feel like as Black, me being Black, all we're asking for is equality. That's it, and opportunities and equity to living the American dream. So I feel like it's hurtful, but like we can't let that stop us. So I'm very grateful that, well, not grateful that George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, but I'm grateful what came out of that. And I'm grateful that I could have taken a part of that, because over here at Old Westbury, as a president, prior president of SGA, we organized the Juneteenth March for 3 miles. We marched from SUNY Old Westbury to Hicksville train station. And we had a good turnout. We had voters registration, we had census. I think that was the most diverse march or demonstration that I've ever organized, because it was a lot of white people, it was Asians, and it was a good learning piece because a lot of students, and it was staff, and I was shocked. We had staff there, and this was in the height of a pandemic. And of course, nobody caught COVID, which was great because we followed the CDC guidelines. But it went to show that we can all come together, and through us all being together, we can make it somewhere. For Pride, I would say the same thing, because I am Black and I am gay, and I feel like most of the time I fall in between the middle because I've been discriminated against on both sides. And I understand both sides. I feel like there's a difference. I feel like, being Black and being gay, there's been different experiences, but I feel like both parts call for the same thing: equality, opportunities. So I don't know. I feel like the Pride, we've come far as well. we both come far, but I think that we should all just come together and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing until things eventually come into fruition.
Khalif, what do you think are the things that your generation could learn from that maybe that aren't as aware of around Juneteenth and that kind of history?
So I think they can learn where they come from. How I feel like they can learn that through hard work, things can happen. I feel like over here at Westbury, if we know our rights, our power, nobody can use them against us because we know them. But when we don't know where we come from, we don't know our rights, it's easy for people to get over on us. So I feel like the education piece plays a major part.
How do we best bring that education to, I mean, do you think, you all are a generation of social media and Twitter, right? Are there some creative ways that we can, ensure that your generation, is it community-based? Should it be in the schools? Is it all of the above?
Okay, so I would say for you, being that you're the Senior Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I feel like you have been doing a great job getting that communication and stuff out to the student body to where we can represent not only Black folks, but everybody. In my leadership and as SGA, I started a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion chair, a part of the SGA, to make sure that we touch the broad diversity of our campus. So what you're doing, as long as you keep doing it, I think we'll be great.
You're too kind, Khalif. Look, you're getting a shout out on this chat line. Not a question, but Khalif is such an inspiring student leader, right? That's just a straight up compliment. But Adidra Irvin would like to know, Khalif, are you finding students of your generation taking courses, taking action to prepare them for future leadership roles, to be in a position to make a difference?
Okay, so I'm not gonna speak for Westbury. So I'll just speak generally. I feel like yes. I would say now I see more people in my age bracket getting involved in government, getting involved in protesting, calling for senators, state, everybody, government, to push certain different policies. So I would say yes. I would say yes. I would say yes.
Okay. Another question for you, Khalif, is, how do you see critiques of performative change from the younger generation's perspective? I'm not sure what that, performative meaning, the way in which people express, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. Do you understand the question? If not, I will keep going.
No. Oh, I think I do. I think when she says performative change, people just saying things and not really being about it. I would say, let me look at the question. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I feel like I'm gonna try to answer it the best way I can. I feel like, as far as like government and people, elected officials, I feel like we need to hold them accountable. When they run for campaigns and say they're going to do certain things, not saying that they can do it, they can try, is not a guarantee. I feel like we should hold them accountable to seeing what they can do. Of course, I've learned this as the president of SGA. Everything that I wanted to do as SGA president, I wasn't able to do, but I was able to do a lot. So, and I was able to put the things that I weren't able to accomplish due to COVID, I was able to push and relay that information to the next person taking the seat. So I would say just holding everyone accountable. If I'm gonna run and say I wanna do this, I want my team to hold me accountable. I want the people who elected me to hold me accountable to making that happen. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And I know some of our panelists may want to jump in. I just want to ask, did you find it hard to center the experiences of Black and brown people of color who are queer in your student government experience?
So at Westbury, no. I would say no. I think my campus is more open to people of the LGBTQIA plus community. And me being, to my knowledge, what I've been told, I'm the first elected gay Black president to represent SUNY or Westbury as the SJ president. So I feel like, oh, Westbury, we're good. We're good. We're good. And I've never really had any problems with any students on campus about me or any other students, or being that I work closely with the dean of students, there's never been an issue of a discrimination or a target between two students based on race or sexual orientation.
I don't know if Chris, Alicia, or Patricia want to jump in. If they have any questions for Khalid. Well, then if not, we will progress to Professor Kuchenberger.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. First, I have so much to say, actually. I'm so excited and I have so many things to say. I have a tendency always to get ahead of myself. So let me slow down and back up before I get ahead of myself. And thank you all so much for inviting me to join this panel discussion today. I am incredibly honored to be in this room with this group of an amazing and esteemed colleagues. So thank you, all of you. And of course, thank you to the audience for being here and for listening to us and being a part of this discussion. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about myself and my connection to SUNY. I've had a connection to SUNY for, gosh, about 25 years. I'm 43 now, and I started my connection to SUNY. I started as a freshman at SUNY Brockport. I transferred to SUNY Purchase, which is where I actually completed my undergraduate degree. And I have since, I've been working at SUNY Onondaga Community College for about 17 years now. And I taught at SUNY Oswego for 3 or 4 years before that. So my connection to SUNY is big, and I love all of the forward momentum and thinking at SUNY. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this institution, this big statewide institution. I professionally am an art historian and an artist, so context, right? As an art historian, I love all things history. So my conversation always, my starting point always is historical context. I always want to bring to the table, okay, where were we? Who were we? That helps us to inform where we are now and where we are going. So outside of OCC, and now slowly kind of more and more a part of OCC, my side gig, though I'm art historian and an artist, my side gig is really LGBTQ advocacy. I minored in gay and lesbian studies 20 years ago. It was called gay and lesbian studies before all of the other letters of the rainbow were added. And I have for about the last 10 years through OCC been doing all kinds of advocacy work. I'm a certified safe space trainer and an LGBTQIA trainer. And I'm right now just started my doctorate in executive leadership and education, focus on social justice. And my dissertation topic, as you can imagine, is going to be around the LGBTQ college experience, focusing, of course, on the transgender population in particular. So I'm going to hit a few of the things that both of the speakers before me kind of touched on, because yep, right on the money. I have nothing but follow-ups, and I totally agree with you kinds of things to say. It's all about education. I am so incredibly thrilled to see the juxtaposition of these two events and these two ideas and celebrations being brought together. And it's because I'm really hopeful that it will force and create more discussions like this, panel discussions like this, around the history of the Black and Brown communities and their connection to the LGBTQ community and the real history of the LGBTQ community. And what I mean by that is that we know, and we all know, that we have this tremendous tendency to really ignore the pivotal moments in our history as they connect to the Black community. In particular, I'll just use as an example, we celebrate Pride in June as a celebration, as a reminder of the Stonewall Riots. Well, okay, who really initiated the Stonewall Riots? Well, if you were to ask the average white LGBTQ individual on the street, they might not know that the Stonewall Riots were really started by Black and brown trans women, right? But we don't really talk about that, do we? We don't talk about that enough. And then in the 1960s, I think it was, there was a gay activist, his name escapes my mind, Frank Kemeny, I think said something about how, this was in the 1960s, was talking about how the LGBTQ movement, even though the words LGBTQ weren't being used at the time, but that the gay movement is like the new Black movement, really completely ignoring and sidelining the fact that no, we haven't made all that much progress yet in Black civil rights. And those kinds of statements really coming from members of the LGBTQ community ignored and erased and completely sidelined all of the progress still needed in and around Black and brown civil rights, Black and brown communities. So my hope as an educator, that's my drive. I'm all about education. I believe that education is advocacy. Just like the other speakers who have said already, it's about education. It's really the educational piece. And my hope is that the juxtaposition of these two events, these two celebrations coming together at the same time in the same month, will force more and more of the LGBTQ community, regardless of identity and ethnic background, whatever, will force members of the LGBTQ community to have real conversations of our history. And our history it includes and is initiated and very much related to civil rights movements in and around the Black and brown communities. And I'm really hopeful that we start having real dialogues about that. It wasn't until I started my own journey in trans advocacy did I start to learn about the history of the LGBTQ community and how it connected to and how the movements really started with Black and brown trans women. And so that's my piece. I'm hopeful that we'll have some real movement in education, force some conversation here. I also want to talk a little bit about the issue of performative celebration. And that's such a great way to say it, the difference between, right, performative or substantive, and what do we really want, right? This is something that my queer friends, my pocket of queer friends talk about all the time, that, yay, we're gay for a month. And right, and that's, let me tell you what, hey, that's a long time, right? 30 days, holy cow, that's a lot of rainbow. But also, right, queer people exist all the way around the year, right? Black and brown communities exist all the way around the year. And it is both great, and I love to see rainbows on stores and rainbows on t-shirts and companies getting in and celebrating. And also, I worry about it being performative. And I, of course, worry about Juneteenth also being performative, right? Big companies just want to cash in on some of those dollars. They want to cash in on some of the queer dollars and Black dollars, and let's not go in that direction. We don't want performative celebration. We want substantive celebration. And it always worries me when I see a company that's got all rainbowed up through the month of June, and then come July 1st, we're still treating our queer employees the same way. And that's a piece that I'm always thinking about. Is this genuine? Is it performative? Will it last? I was reading an article just earlier today talking about what a wonderful world it would be if we stopped celebrating July 4th and only celebrated June 19th, the day that all Americans became free, not just some. Boy, we do celebrate with enthusiasm July 4th, and sort of maybe, I don't know, not with the same energy, June 19th. And boy, this year, I'm thinking real hard. I'm looking at my calendar thinking, would it be so bad if we eliminated July 4th and moved all of that celebration to June 19th? Why aren't we doing that? Let's celebrate the day we all became citizens and all saw our freedoms really as a potential. Yeah, that's. I think I've hit all the highlights of kind of the biggest pieces of things that have kind of hit me as significant in the discussion so far. Anybody thoughts or questions or ideas?
Chris, I have a question, because I think you really hit on something. The fact that, I hadn't thought of it that way, like that Juneteenth is the day that all Americans, right, became free, right? But it took over 2 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation for that to happen, right? And I think, wow, what does that say, right? What a commentary that is on, there's freedom in theory and there's freedom in fact, and I've since learned that part of the issue with the delay had to do with the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation was only valid in a place in which the authority of the, now I'm gonna mess this up, but it had to do with recognizing the authority of the president to actually create, right, to free the slaves, right, and people who were enslaved, and you know, I guess it was only a few days before Juneteenth that Texas actually submitted to that, kind of came back into the Union in some sense. So, you know, it just strikes me as, you know, utterly just mind-boggling that, you know, you could have people who, you know, are still laboring under, you know, as people who were enslaved, when many people, you know, knew that their, you know, that their emancipation had been declared. But, you know, it just, you know, it strikes me as sometimes change comes slow. And maybe that's part of the story of Juneteenth.
Yeah, gosh, I agree with you. Maybe that is part of the story. And you really bring up an important piece. Even though we can change the laws, it doesn't mean that we can change people's hearts, right? So it's not just about, yeah, we've got to have the laws. That's start number one, right? Top down, we have to be clear, these are the laws, but also it's about moving people to understanding the authority of those laws and respecting, gosh, each other as humans, right? I actually liken the idea to, if you look at India, right? India has removed and closed and canceled its caste system. If you were to travel to India, it still has a caste system, and it is alive and well, though legally it does not exist. Boy, what an interesting, I'll give you another really strange idea from history. Think about the city of Constantinople, right? It was conquered in 1453. It changed, the Ottoman Turks changed the name to Istanbul. You and I and us in America did not agree to start calling it Istanbul until the 1960s. So look at all of the countries around the world and societies around the world that simply ignored the law, if you will. And so I agree with you, Teresa, what a really important piece of information, right? Yet 2 whole years, people were freed and people knew and just kept quiet about it as to not upset the apple cart or to, I don't even know what could possibly be the holdup. The law is in place. Let's move on it. Yeah, I think that it speaks a lot to how embedded and systematic our racism is in this country, and to what great lengths it's going to take to really unpack and remove. I kind of look at this opportunity with Juneteenth overlapping with and being together with Pride, exactly, of LGBTQ Pride, exactly the same way. We kind of need to look to our leaders in each of our populations, whoever, Assemblywoman, women, whoever our leaders are in our country, we really do need to look to those individuals and say, okay, my friend, the onus is on you. And right now, I know simply as a queer person, I recognize that the onus is on those of us who are in positions of leadership to take this opportunity, not to just, performatively throw some rainbow on it, but really have these conversations and open an LGBTQ resource center, but make sure that a good chunk of what you're doing is simply educating where our history is, where we come from, who was involved, what do we really look like.
I want to give the other panelists a chance to jump in and ask Chris some questions.
I was nodding through most of what Chris was saying. I know everyone else was nodding too, but I think talking about the Stonewall Rebellion, in history it says a lot of times it says riots, but Marsha P. Johnson was a Black woman who was tired of the harassment of police, and that honestly, that the beginnings or the origins of Stonewall is sometimes whitewashed, and that, I think the fact that you said that, I just, I think sometimes the world looks to Black women to uphold everyone, but then they want us in the background supporting and pushing and moving the movement, but not always in the face, on the face of a movement. And I think that it's disheartening, but I really thank you for acknowledging that. And everything else you said was spot on. Performative is not what we want. We want the substantive, and it will take time. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Assemblyman Heineman just commented on Marsha P. Johnson. If anyone personifies intersectionality in action, Marsha P. Johnson did. You know, if we want to talk about the intersections of Pride and of Juneteenth, you have that in the figure of Marsha P. Johnson, who has not gotten her due fully. I think she has just come into any sort of recognition through largely through the 2018 documentary. A lot of people have become familiar with what she's done. But you know, her tragic murder in 1992, you know, and then, you know, the campaigns to, you know, change the death certificate. I mean, her story is incredible, and it should be a part of you know, the curricula. I say that we need to say her name and teach about Marsha P. Johnson.
Yeah, I agree. Gosh, I just couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Dr. Clark, why don't you take it away?
Well, everyone has said so much, and you know, I don't know where to land here. So I'm going to kind of pull from and draw from a number of things that people had commented on, and to talk about the education piece. That seemed to be the common thread. And what was apparent to me, you know, when we talk about the delay in the proclamation in Texas, when in 1865 the enslaved finally realized that they were free. There's something really compelling about this delay, and how, you know, it sort of serves as sort of symbolic of the ways in which freedom is provisional even today. You know, when we think about, you know, our celebrations and what we've gained over the course of centuries. What's interesting, an interesting sort of fact about the proclamation that was given in 1865, it's not the verbatim proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. The proclamation in Texas, they recommended that the enslaved stay where they are and labor there. And so that is just really significant to me, just in terms of not only, you know, the 2-year lag time, but the fact that they don't want folks to move. They want them to stay in place and to labor under slavery by another name. So in terms of education, one of the things that, you know, comes to mind, you know, when we talk about not just Juneteenth, I am so happy that it's signed into law as a federal holiday. There are other events that it seems that there's this greater campaign to suppress some of the how to put it, unsavory events that have happened because state legislators, whomever in different states across the country don't want us to talk about race. And the scapegoat, or the term that, or catch-all term that is used for these opponents that don't want us to talk about race or talk about gender, talk about trans people, critical race theory has become this sort of straw doll that people have been sort of using as an excuse for not talking about race. So much so, and I think one of the most ironic cases is the one in Oklahoma, where we just commemorated the 100-year anniversary of the massacre in Tulsa, but yet the governor managed to say ban the teaching of critical race theory in community colleges. So, you know, we have these ironies to deal with. And a lot of what we understand, or a lot of what others, and maybe some of us in the audience, understand critical race theory to be, is born out of a sort of general sort of misunderstanding of what it purports to do. And so just to give some sense of what critical race theory is, so we can begin to, unpack what it is not. So critical race theory, the tenets are one, recognition that race is not biologically real, but is socially constructed and socially significant. Also, critical race theory is an acknowledgement that racism is a normal feature of society and is embedded within systems and institutions like the legal system that replicate racial inequality. And this dismisses the idea that racist incidents are aberrations, but are instead manifestations of structural and systemic racism. And so CRT, critical race theory, recognizes that that the law can be complicit in maintaining an unjust social order, but where critical race theorists position themselves is that they understand that the law can be used to then challenge those same inequalities. So scholars and educators in other disciplines, I know in my discipline in English and creative writing and in history and political science, have made use of some of the founding tenets and terminology of CRT, most notably Kimberly Crenshaw's notion of intersectionality, which looks at multiple intersecting identities and the attendant oppressions and assets that groups of people occupy. And this is valuable in that intersectionality allows for a more nuanced and critical lens through which to understand oppression and racism as systemic, which is important. It's not about, individuals who do bad things. It's about these systems and institutions that embed these oppressive and racist structures. And so bringing this to the fore in what we do as educators is important overall for both Black folks, trans folks, all of us, to understand how we are in this all together.
Wow. So Patricia, you said a lot there, right? So a lot. And I think one of the things that's really compelling is this idea that, well, it's not just compelling, but it really causes us to think, right? That the law can be both at the same time uphold unjust structures and at the same time be the basis of challenging inequalities, right? And it can do that simultaneously. And what's so fascinating is that when you started off and you talked about that general order that was read by the Union General in Galveston, right, on June 9th, 1865, what is fascinating is not only did it say, you point out, right, that it says, all slaves are free, right? This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes on to say, right, freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They're informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, right? Because a lot of the Union Army was there to free, right, to challenge slavery. And so, no, we're not going to allow you to gather at those military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness, either
right.
there or elsewhere. What a strong statement that makes, right? Yeah, you can't be idle, right? And we know what happened as a result of, sort of Black codes and the Reconstruction were all about punishing idleness, right? But, I think that is such a strong and powerful point that at the same time you have this thing saying, we're ending slavery, this announcement, right, about freedom, you also have these structures that we see even today, right? When we see these sort of broken windows policing, or these statutes that criminalize loitering, right? It's fascinating. I'm gonna let some other panelists jump in, because I could be all over that for about an hour.
I'm sorry, I had to black out my screen. I had to take this call, but when we talk about the 13th Amendment, 1865 and June 19th, slaves are freed. And then early that year, the 13th Amendment came on, which basically perpetuated the institution of slavery, which when I think about as a legislator, the building behind me, was built, I think, in additions were added, but it was never supposed to house the likes of me to be in the legislature, to now pass laws that change the trajectory of people in the state. And that is not lost on me. And it's an honor to serve every day. And I think about how we're changing, we wanted to make it so that parolees could vote. Most of the parolees look like me. Most of the parolees come back to communities like mine. And what better way to engage them? And what happens is to give them back their right to vote. And, we're trying to pass more legislation to make it so that we are closing more prisons in New York State. And my colleagues do not like that. But when I think about an education system that is unjust, when most of the children in public schools look like me, it tells you that there's something wrong. The only way you can get a degree right now, if you go to any of the one of the state prisons, is if you go through a program that's funded by outsiders. TAP, the tuition assistance program, was taken away because the Republicans felt, why am I paying for someone to get a free education? And it's not a free education. It's about, if our Department of Corrections was really educating or correcting behavior, they would give them an education so that they don't have to go back inside to keep this perpetual system going. Now, I know I'm talking to the choir here, and I know you all agree, but I think one of the most frustrating things to me, which is, I'm so happy. If anything, if I got done was get Juneteenth and we're all at this point, right? But the frustrating for me is even being a legislator, is all of the hurdles it takes to move things faster so that the benefits will be seen soon. And I think that for me, running for office, you feel like you're going to change the world, and you get in there and you're like, just like you, when you ran for student government, it's like you realize there's a lot you still can't do. But it doesn't mean you stop. It doesn't mean you give up.
Yes, and what is really sort of concerning here, especially during this particular moment, again, it seems to be picking up momentum, that a lot of these state legislations across the country are reaching into K-12 curricula and banning the teaching of race, gender, everything, and in the name of, and again, they're broadly calling this critical race theory, and that critical race theory has become this sort of straw dial that everyone wants to sort of poke arrows into. But again, I think we're setting our future generations up for just citizens who are just not prepared to really understand all the nuances and complexities of the American democracy. We're really setting folks up in a bad way.
It's ironic that so much of what we've been talking about, is the importance of not allowing this holiday to become, not allowing Juneteenth to become something that just is a Hallmark holiday, right? Not performative, right? But substantive, and doing this through education. And yet that's the very front in which opponents of critical race theory are moving, right? To try to, try to, infuse themselves in the education system with a particular bias, right? With a particular, well, critical race theory is divisive. Like, so whenever has America not been a divisive, when is there ever, it's all about conflict, right? So, but it makes people feel uncomfortable. Well, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a family that talked about race nonstop, right? Because it affected our everyday experiences in life. So talking about race doesn't make me uncomfortable. It may make a lot of other people who feel uncomfortable when certain questions get asked, right? But the same thing with implicit bias training in the attack on that, right? This is scientifically proven. Implicit bias, it's not a theory. You can go on the Harvard Implicit Associations test. Anybody can take it. It's free. And it's very clear, right? That we all come with a framework. We come with certain notions about what success looks like, what opportunity, what people who have potential look like, and those are our biases. But to try to eliminate the conversation about that is just, to me, going backward. So at the same time, we're going forward with a holiday, right? And going forward, these intersectional kind of good conversations about pride and Juneteenth and race and queerness and the intersections, we also have this, this pull to go backward.
I think I just want to say, when Chris was talking, it made me think about Chris and Patricia. We talk about the concentration on K through 12, is that this movement to ban certain types, to ban an education, what do we think we're producing? And one of the things that the new chancellor of the Board of Regents, Chancellor Young, who happens to be from Queens, he said that every education department within the state of New York has the power now to be more inclusive in their curriculum. And I think that for me was like, what? So in Onondaga County, I know Onondaga well, my good friend, the Assembly member, Hunter, lives in Syracuse. So the Onondaga Nation, I know a lot about Onondaga County, but I think for me, when he said that, I said, then we can just do this tomorrow. Let's start working on, each county or board, like, you have the power to change your curriculum tomorrow. You don't have to wait for the state education department to come there and tell you, because we pass a lot of legislation. And, I don't know where half of it goes or how the enforcement of it goes. There's a lot of legislation about changing the curriculum. But if we have the power to make gender equity, queerness, LGBTQ issues, Black issues, Latino issues, if we have the power to do it now, what are we waiting for? There are enough experts in the state, enough experts at SUNY graduating who can get this done now.
I want to remind our audience that this we've sort of we've segued into the live chat part of our event, which means that questions that you submit, please, they'll be passed on to, they'll be read and answered by our panelists. So don't be shy in terms of offering questions or comments. Let me start with one that was received. This is from a colleague, Dr. Malika Carter, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at SUNY ESF. She said, I had a colleague say to me that DEI initiatives could seem exclusive days before the Senate's decision, right? I wonder if anyone has any experience with discussing Pride or Juneteenth with people who seem fearful about inclusion, right? When an institution's histories have been insular, making the visibility of others as us versus them. This sort of zero-sum game.
Yeah, that seems to be the sort of perennial response. Whenever you talk about, one of the most clear-cut examples is Black Lives Matter, and how everything that has to do with protesting police violence against colored people, people of color, that somehow that is not supporting, what police do. And so it's, so even though there are, Black people who are represented in, police forces. And so, I mean, that's just one example, but with trans people, with queer people, with you name it, that's not, part of, the normal state of affairs. It's always, it's like you're talking too much about who you are, and it's not just about you. You're not exceptional. You're not special, and so there's this. It seems that it's about not about you. And again, with Black Lives Matter, the response is always all lives matter. Blue lives matter.
Yeah.
And all these different responses, because the ways in which we've been excluded, all the different groups of people that we've talked about here, the ways in which we've been historically excluded, there's a sense that the general public just, or at least some, just don't get it. That to talk about it specifically doesn't mean that we it's an us versus them.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. In graduate school, I had a good girlfriend, Carrie Bergeron. We're still good friends today. She's white. She lives in North Carolina. And I said to her one time, I said, everything to do with your hair, whether your hair is greasy or straight or what, if you're having a bad hair day, I said, I know, because I grew up learning all about you. And I said, not about me. And I said to her, she was like, I never thought of it that way. And I think she had the curiosity and understood. We're still very good friends, to tell you that learning about me doesn't eradicate who you are. It doesn't make you less than. And so when it comes to the curricula, we've been learning about you our whole lives. We only learned about ourselves through other means, going to college, or if you had parents that made sure on the weekends or after school that you read books and you were able to look at, well, Elvis Presley didn't create rock and roll, it was Black folk. Like my 10-year-old said the other day when they were talking about Elvis Presley, she's like, Mom, this is not right. But I'm, it's because of the influences I have on her. Learning about me does not eradicate or make you any less than. And that is, Patricia, you hit it on the head.
So I have some breaking news. President Biden signed the legislation. So it is now a national. Yeah. I guess he was getting back from Europe and talks with Putin, but he has signed it. Look, I want to, go ahead, Cleve.
I would like to answer. I would like to say it's not exclusive. I would say Pride and Juneteenth is open. Pride covers a diversity of every race. And Juneteenth covers not only Black people, because there was whites that helped sign it into law. So it's history. History is not exclusive, it's inclusive. Not to make a comparison, but the KKK was exclusive because no Black person could be a part of it. I can't quote this, but I'm pretty sure the Black Panther Party had white representation, helped do the things that they did.
Khalif, I want to ask you a question, because this thing about, is it a zero-sum game, right? Your generation is a little different, right? In the sense that they're digital, they're very, digitally connected. They've had to go through in their education, COVID, learning from home, remote instruction. You all have really been much more on devices, right? So we see a lot of anger being expressed in social media around, race and people feeling displaced, or, where's the good old narrative about America? Like, why all of a sudden is it being displaced with all these other, right? But it gets expressed a little differently. And the best way I can describe it is, and I'm dating myself, but, I remember getting into literally just repeated experiences with white classmates in high school and in college. And at one point, it would just pour out, and I'd say, this is what really pisses me off about, and and they're like, and like at the end of it, we're like, oh, you're cool, we worked it out. Sometimes you hear that a lot in the masculine or male context of guys come to blows and they're best friends, right? But that doesn't seem to happen as much with your generation, given there's a lot more technology involved. So I was just curious how you see people. When I was the chief diversity officer at Buffalo, it was all about having difficult conversations, bringing people together in a space of risk, giving them some safety, having some ground rules, and having some conversations. And out of it, people sort of became more enlightened. But what do you do when you're in lockdown and you're doing remote instruction, or 4 of you are sitting at the table, all looking down at the phones? How do you get to those points of mutual understanding?
I don't know. I can say that over here, I did take a class. It was not a traditional class. We had students from 55 all the way to 17, and we discussed politics, and we all, had a conversation. There was a lot of disagreements. We spoke about Donald Trump's presidency, different laws and things they were trying to put in, and there was different opinions. So I would say that in the class, it was a learning thing for everybody, because we got to see how other people thought compared to how we thought. And it was a learning experience for both, because I would say the class, we came to a happy medium. So I would say, I guess over here through conversations and education, I think it plays a part.
So as a mom, let me just ask this question. Do we ban the things, right? In other words, do we just say, you walk in the door, your cell phone goes in a holder? I mean, do you feel like the technology does more harm than good around helping people? I mean, or do you see chat rooms and places where people are making progress?
So it's yes and no. So I would say for the most part, I feel like social media keeps us aware of what's going on around the world, everywhere. So it keeps us in tune. When it comes to education, if there's something we don't know, we can Google it. So if somebody didn't know what Juneteenth was, they can Google it, go to Wikipedia or any network and find out what it is. But there is a lot of like negative stuff. So I say yes and no. But for the most part, yes, because you learn more through having social media.
I'm glad Khalif said, I don't know, because we don't always have the answers. And I'm glad you said that. Because I think,
if I don't know, I'm not going to BS you.
Right, good. And it's okay not to know. And I will say, I have a 22-year-old and the 10-year-old, I'm sorry, she's 11. She corrected me. She heard me. And I think it is tough, because I come home and I'm on my phone. Sometimes they have to tell me, Mommy, I'm talking to you. And I have to, I'm working constantly. So I think the fact that you can just pull up this device and do a whole research paper, when I used to have to go to the library and make copies with my change, microfilm. So I just think about how far technology has come. And then there comes a point, I think, in families where you have to put down the devices. And the sad part is, with COVID, the pandemic made us pick up devices even more, because you couldn't even interact with people. You couldn't be outside. You couldn't visit family. You couldn't play outside. My daughter would play outside by herself on a scooter, but it was hard because she missed her friends. She missed the classroom. So I don't know how, just like Khalif said, I don't know how we get back to giving up the devices when for the last year and a half we were so dependent on it. We're meeting through a technology that none of us knew what Zoom was at the beginning of this. We didn't know. So it's good. I think it'll take a while for us to get back to that, if ever.
If I could just add, I mean, and there's some dangers to, social media and, these platforms. I think about, companies like Facebook and Twitter and these algorithms and how they sort of, direct what it is that we should think and how we should respond to certain things. And perhaps, taking a break from our devices and, and actually sitting down and thinking and creating some distance, and to, have a more critically engaged, relationship with devices. I know it's difficult, especially with the pandemic. But it's certainly something to think about, especially the power that these media companies have.
Well, here's where I really have to give a plug to SUNY, right? Because we take students from the four corners of New York State and other states and across the world. We put them together in close living and learning experiences, right? In dorms, study groups, classrooms, and through those kind of experiences, right, where you actually, you're not only theoretically interacting with someone, say, who is trans or queer on a screen, right? But you have, hey, let's go, we're both in line at the cafeteria. Let's sit down, I'll sit down at your table. We'll have a conversation. I mean, the way in which we can never just expect the magic to happen. It has to be something that is, that is intentional, right? But, it's where the ground rules, right? Where people respect and understand it's important for everyone to feel welcome, respected, and a sense of belonging. But I think when students leave a SUNY campus, they graduate and they've had that experience, right? They go out into communities. Many of our graduates stay in the state of New York, right? They go out into those communities and they take their own innate sense of what it's, the importance of interacting with people, what you can learn from people who are different than you. They take that out into their communities, right? And if we don't do that job well, right, if all we end up with is bitter students who are angry and shouting at each other and not seeing each other, then we influence what the future of New York State is. I mean, so I can't, I don't think you can underestimate how important that work is that SUNY does every day. So hats off to SUNY. We're going to keep trying to do it better, but there are explosions every day. We only have about 9 minutes left. So I think what might be helpful and, wait a sec. I got one comment but from an anonymous attendee. Why can't we just incorporate digital citizenship and deliberative dialogue instead of comparing generations? Even among the same generation is a wide gap, and we're not a monolith with social media consumption. We can teach critically, checking misinformation. That's a really good point. Thank you. Right, not monolithic. But I thought maybe giving each of our panelists 2 minutes to maybe just sum up, give some parting comments as we wind down. Love to hear what you think the new frontier is, any advice you have, or any continuing questions based upon this conversation. You can go in any order.
Well, I'll unmute myself and throw out some ideas. People always ask me, I do sort of advocacy work, and I might meet with a big group of people, and people are always asking me at the end of a session, what can I do to be an ally? And there's a part of me that wonders, do they want to just know what's the right color pen and the right flag, and when do I fly it, and how do I do this? How can I be an ally to you? And my response back always to people is, and it's right, this is a common response, well, get a little education, do a little reading. Well, I'm trying really to further the needle and not just say, okay, pick up a book and do a little reading, but read this article, read this book, read this thing. So I wonder if there's anybody here in this panel who is currently reading something either maybe they've read it now or recently or gosh, 20 years ago. I have a little stack of books next to me right here that I read in college in gay and lesbian studies, my gay and lesbian studies courses that were entry points for me, entry points into the conversation of intersectionality, if you will. Really, they were great entry points. You know, Audre Lorde's Zami, that biomythography book is absolutely fantastic. Travesti by Don Kulik, if you're familiar with that book. Both of those books, again, I read these 20 years ago, but they were fantastic entry points for me. So my new game, if you will, and people ask me, how am I an advocate? How do I be a good ally or advocate? I try to give them real concrete, here, read this. This is something you don't know about, and read this article or this book. And so I'm actually going to pose to the panelists, is there anything that you're reading or have read historically that you think is a good, even just an entry point book for someone who doesn't know about the history of these populations, the intersectionality of these populations? That's my question to the group, if I can pose one.
I love that question because I put my email in the chat. So Chris, can you please put those books for me? Because I can't tell you, I can't wait till after this election season is over so I can do some downtime and some reading, because all I'm reading these days is finishing up session and getting ready for next session. So I would appreciate, Chris, if you could put all of that in the chat. But I think she's exactly right, of not just telling people to read a certain book, but telling them specifically where to go for the information. And I would say to everyone that if there's a Juneteenth festival going on near you, attend. Be an active advocate, ally. If there's a pride celebration going on, attend. I think the thing is, you can say it, but you have to put the action behind it. I'm not deeply religious. I do attend church, but faith without works is dead. You have to put something in when you're going to tell people this is who you are. They have to see it to know that you're truly with them. And also in those private conversations that you have with people, if they're being racist or sexist or misogynist or homophobic, you got to call them out. Because I think if you don't have those conversations, uncomfortable conversations with people, then you're just perpetuating what we've all been talking about here today. So where you can be in those spaces and make those differences, please do so. And Chris, please put that information in the chat. Thank you very much.
I would just like to echo what Assemblywoman Heineman has said. Yes, those moments where, you have these teachable moments where you have an encounter with someone in public and, they come incorrect, you have an opportunity to say something. And there's a way that you can say it in such that, they might or maybe not get it, but there's certainly an opportunity to say and to speak truth to whatever a situation is. And I would also advocate, reading. I've been on a reading, I don't know what you want to call a marathon. People talk about Black lives and how Black lives matter, and the real question of what are the Black lives. And I've been reading a lot of autobiographies, memoirs, going back as far as Anne Moody's Coming of Age in Mississippi, and Man-Child in the Promised Land. All these sort of classic memoirs and autobiographies that we've read in the 1960s and 70s, and they remind us of what the continuum of Black lives and and other memoirs, so Trans Lives and Transgender Warriors by Leslie Feinberg. There are a number of books that can certainly inform us.
Khalif, did you want to hop in?
So I got a phone call and I didn't get the question. That's why I wrote you privately.
No, just what you think if you were being asked, by someone how I can be an ally. Chris was pointing out, it's so important to be able to not just say, educate yourself, but here, read this.
Mhm.
There's anything that you've read or listened to recently that you think is important to put in front of people to help them maybe understand issues of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, anything.
Nothing that no one else have already covered. No, I think the education piece plays a big part, because if you know how to act.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I would just add in that I have not read Annette Gordon Reed's book on Juneteenth, but I did read her New Yorker article, and I thought it was spectacular. It'll probably whet your appetite to read the book. Also, Isabel Wilkerson's Cast, which really talks about race and class, and that's something that we have this idea of the American dream, right? All you have to do is work hard in America,
Yeah.
and anybody can be a millionaire. Well, no, and so how looking at the class system within the United States, I think is important as well. Johanna, I'm going to, in our last minute, kick it back to you to close this out.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you so much to all of you, our panelists. It's just been a really educational experience and conversation, and also inspiring, and just really appreciate all of your perspectives. And thank you to our audience. It's been really a great time, and we look forward to more of these conversations, and have had a really very fulfilling Pride celebration this month for SUNY. So thanks all for participating. Have a great evening.
Wait, how do I get a shirt, Terry, please? This SUNY Pride.
Johanna is the
I can
guardian
help
of the
you with
shirt.
that, Assembly Member. You got it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
Get my pride on. See?
That's right.
All right.
Thanks
Thank you
everyone for
all.
joining.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you very
care.
much.
Bye-bye.